Brussels Bytes, a podcast about technology, digital society, and European policy. Brought to you by the Martin Center with Dimitar Lilkov.
Dear friends, welcome back to Brussels Bytes. The summer break is just around the corner, but when it comes to digital issues and tech policy, there is never a dull moment. The European Commission is keeping many people busy with a flurry of proposals and initiatives for the digital domain. In the last several podcast episodes, I sat down with experts from civil society organizations and private company professionals to talk about some of the hottest issues related with disinformation, AI surveillance, fundamental rights online, and many, many others. But today, I have the pleasure to talk to one of the policymakers in Brussels who has been personally involved with some of the most groundbreaking pieces of legislation for the digital space. Today's guest, Axel Voss, lawyer by trade and member of the European Parliament from the European People's Party. Before his involvement with European politics, Mr. Voss has started his professional and political career in the city of Bonn in Germany. Politically affiliated with the Christian Democratic Union in Germany, Axel Voss has been in the European Parliament since 2009, where he has been involved with prominent legislative files concerning legal and digital issues. Axel, it's a pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation. It's my pleasure.
Axel, you have been member of the European Parliament for more than a decade now, and I think you've seen your fair share of crises, negotiations, groundbreaking moments, standoffs. Maybe tell our listeners about your most vivid memories in the European Parliament in the last decade.
Yes, so you are totally right. These last 12 years I have been to the European Parliament. There are a lot of moments and a lot of crises. So I can't remember a time without a crisis in a way. But so, of course, what has been very special was from the beginning the financial market crisis. Then we have had this volcano out of a sudden, you couldn't fly over Europe and so on. And Fukushima, of course, was the moment where we had to discuss then the energy question. And of course, a very moving moment was the Brexit.
Of course.
And this was very, very sad. But of course we have to continue to go on, and of course the migration situation in 2015, 2016 was something what was really going into the deep of all our structures and opinions and so on. So this has been moments where I considered at the beginning never will appear. Mm-hmm. But I always thought I can talk about the beauty of Europe, but then all of a sudden you are only into some problems and discuss these in such a way.
Yeah, especially when we talk about migration, Brexit, there's also an emotional element to these questions, not only hard legislative or technical details, right? No. We talk about emotions as well, feelings and people. Talking about the past 10 years in the Parliament and the highlights of the work of the European Parliament, let's maybe focus on the General Data Protection Regulation, the GDPR. This was surely one of the highlights of the previous Parliament. You were directly involved with this work. Recently, you have been very vocal about the need for GDPR reform and that we need to rethink this legislation when it comes to Europe's competitiveness, and there are some shortcomings of this legislation. Why are you concerned about the GDPR?
So, just to confirm, the GDPR is really a kind of a cornerstone of the digital world and legislation, and it's very important. But I still think that we have to improve the GDPR regarding the upcoming upcoming developments, the innovation, what we are seeing. So if we then trying to seeing this in parallel, like blockchain, like artificial intelligence, like text and data mining and so on, these rules for the GDPR is not made for all of these new technologies. You can live with this, yes, but if you're then looking to the competition, the global race on AI competition, the global race on digitalization, then you see we are too slow. We are not offering to our digital industry the data they need to train their algorithms. And AI, for instance, is of strategic relevance. And here I see the GDPR more hindering innovation. And of course, you can say it's not only the rule, it might be also the application, how we are applying to the GDPR. But here in this regard, I have to say it's both. It's already, from my point of view, a little bit updated. It's not legally clear enough. And again, we are not meeting the upcoming technologies and developments here, so that there is a need for revising, particularly not the whole issue, but in some of these aspects we should be better.
I fully agree with you when it comes to implementation, because we've seen already how different member states have struggled to actually impose these rules. We see how some of the national data protection authorities are understaffed, under-budgeted, and they simply cannot handle the bulk of cases. So here, I fully agree. But some people might say, well, wait, if we open up the GDPR text now, does this mean that we will break and lower the privacy safeguards we have for European citizens? Isn't this a potential problem if we revise the text, if we also lower this protection?
The sense of the GDPR is more than less focusing on a risk. And if we are just seeing the risk everywhere, then of course you are feeling understaffed and underfinanced and so on. But if you're concentrating on these big techs who are really using the data for everything what we probably don't know, then they should be more focused on. So it doesn't make sense to supervise or control a single handcrafter somewhere. There is not the risk for our data. So of course they also should act in the same way and so on, but probably not having the same safeguards in place like a big company. But here I think we can do better. And this sense, or the sense is not in lowering data protection, but the sense is more opening data, so also personal data for business models, for innovation, for development. Because if we are looking to health data, just as an example, you can research a lot with these health data, but if you need always a consent, and probably you can do your one research, but you can't using then the personal data for a different aspect or purpose. And this is how I'm thinking we should act differently. And this has to do also with competition. This has to do with prosperity, with wealth, and also to have a kind of a lead in innovation and so on. If not all, but a lot of European companies are going abroad, so outside the European Union, to train algorithms, then this shouldn't be the sense of a GDPR. So therefore, I think we need to be more creative and securing also that we have a kind of a surviving element in the future, although we have the GDPR in place.
So for you, just to wrap it up very quickly, the way forward would be to use more aggregated data or pseudonymized data?
Yeah.
What's your proposal in a nutshell? How can we move forward on this?
Yeah. So at first we can think about some techniques like anonymization, like pseudonymization, but also trying to find some ways forward in voluntarily donating data. So the Commission is now coming up with the so-called Digital Governance Act. Yes, this is the right idea, but it's not solving probably the fundamental question: is our society able also to donate data in a way, also for rare diseases, to make more research and so on? And here we can find tools where this is totally the same, secure for your privacy, instead of sticking to a rule what we have adapted in 2018 and thinking, oh yes, it's still correct, but now we are seeing this is not flexible enough. And here I think we can be more creative, but we have to have the will, political will.
Something you already mentioned, and I want to follow up on this, and a topic very closely linked with privacy and data specifically, is the European Union's new rules on artificial intelligence. You mentioned AI just now. Our recent Brussels Bytes episode, the previous one, was devoted to artificial intelligence. So what are your initial thoughts on the Commission's recent proposal on AI and its whole approach towards risk?
At first, let me start with the more positive points. So it is a good idea. They have done this quite good. And I'm also very grateful that they have thought about these so-called sandboxes, because we will ask as the European legislator for a lot of safeguards what algorithms should be able for. So like not biased, it's non-discriminatory, gender balanced, in line with GDPR and so on. But if you're then not offering the quality data for it, because it has to be also personal data, probably, then all of a sudden you're probably having problems in all meeting these criteria. That's why sandboxes are a very good idea. And also having these criteria, what I'm missing is the question of liability. It's not in it, it should come later, but I think we would like to have a kind of a very broad approach to it. This is a question what we have to solve. Secondly, focusing on facial recognition and banning this in public spaces, this is not specifically AI. This is not the general approach of AI. This should be separately treated or handled. And from my point of view, this has nothing to do with the general approach of AI. So I would separate these. Of course, we have to think about how also to regulate facial recognition, but not in a general approach of AI. These are my main criticism here on these proposals. Of course, internally in the European Parliament, we are now fighting about these competences, which committee might be competent for it, but this is a different question.
And very quickly on facial recognition, you think it should be separate because of the huge public security concerns, potentially, about privacy concerns?
So you get the impression, because this is integrated in this AI regulation, you get the impression, oh, this is the typically used version of AI, and this is not. A facial recognition, of course, has to do something with security questions, with fundamental rights, with so public spaces and so on. But banning a technology without differentiating is never a good idea. So we can differentiate. We know what is good and what is right and what is wrong. And here I think we can approach this totally differently instead of coming along and saying, oh, no, we don't want it. And even you never know what you're cutting off as a kind of an development or innovation if you're just saying now no. And then probably also I would say there are also for facial recognition safeguards for data protection or face protection, if you want, in place. Probably not all of my colleagues are knowing these, but there are, like data protection itself, are there also safeguards for facial recognition? It's always a question how to use the data, who is using the data, and to what purpose. And if we're making clear for what purposes we can use facial recognition, then we are going better forward than just saying, oh, facial recognition is a threat to your life.
So for you, the problem is also how we also frame the debate and how the whole debate is being developed. Okay.
Yeah.
And you also just mentioned liability in artificial intelligence. Your work in the parliament is also closely related with this. You had a resolution on this. And this is also, when we talk about artificial intelligence, has always been a bit like a philosophical debate. Who is responsible if something goes wrong? Is it the software? Is it the producer? Is it the company? Is it the network operator because of some technical aspects? So how should we upgrade our understanding of liability when we talk about artificial intelligence?
Yeah. Oh, you perfectly described the situation. So what we should have in mind is that this kind of new approach, or AI as a kind of a new issue to tort law or to civil law, we have to make sure that we are still ending up with this European single market and not being fragmented throughout the 27 member states and having totally different approaches on these. That's why I think we need a more harmonized approach on liability for artificial intelligence, that everyone in our common market has the same rule to follow or to apply. And this is what I have in mind in focusing on kind of a more harmonized approach. Secondly, we should make sure that the liability question is also kind of legally clear to everyone. So, of course, we have systems in place for liability questions, but if you're having different answers to these, then we should more focus on high-risk AI systems. Not every AI system needs to have a kind of a new approach on liability issues. And what we have done in the parliament is not a kind of a new idea, it's just linking AI high-risk systems to the existing liability rules. And so that we say high-risk systems should adapt to strong liability rules, and all the other AI systems have the normal tort law approach.
So it's a targeted approach that if a system is considered as high risk, it should follow additional rules and it should be more transparent, more accountable, and so forth, correct?
Yeah. So we are not complicating things and just saying, so at first, just to be clear, strong rules for high-risk systems, and this means then that you have an insurance in place, but focusing on high-risk systems means also there's a kind of a threat for your body, life, or property, and secondly, so what we have done in this proposal, that you don't know, or you can't predict who might be the potential victim. And so that everyone who is in the wrong place at the wrong time might be a potential victim. And that's why we then said this might be a high-risk AI system then.
I see.
So it's a traffic guiding system, or drone, or autonomous driving car, and so on. But so this kind of issues. But if I may,
Yes.
Kind of a surgery robot might also harm your body and life and so on. But you know already who might be the patient, so it's not a public threat to everyone, and that's the difference what we have had in mind. I know the definition might not be perfect so far, and everyone is also invited to come up with better ideas. What is AI? What is a high-risk system in AI? But this is what we are then trying to come to bring forward, that everyone knows at the end what to do and where he is going to, and so on, and just make legally clearly what is happening if you are fulfilling criteria 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, let's not forget that these rules are still in the making, and there's a complicated procedure upcoming in Parliament, in Council, on the general rules of AI, and also on other specific provisions. So we'll actually see finalized rules maybe in 2023, 2024, who knows? So it's a long timeline. We can continue this interesting conversation on GDPR, on AI. We can continue digging through the policy issues, but I would really want to try to elevate the conversation a bit, zoom out from these specific policy topics, and let's try to see the bigger picture. Last year in 2020, you came out with your own personal digital manifesto for digital sovereignty and geopolitical competitiveness. It was a very interesting document, an ambitious one, as I might add. What are the main points you'd like to stress when we talk about digital sovereignty, let's say? It's a buzzword in Brussels in the last months or years. And what's your specific take on this? And how can Europe be more ambitious and more competitive globally, digitally?
Yeah, so at first we have to realize that Europe is in a kind of a sandwich position between the US and also China. And therefore, I think we should go our own way, not too much orientated to capitalism and not to totalitarian regimes. So that's why if we would like to found ourselves a bit more on these values, we have to think about what do we need at the end. And here, of course, all the preconditions, what we should have in place, and this should be already done in a way, but it isn't. So if we're coming to infrastructure, let's say 5G, quantum computer, etc., to investments, we do not have enough of investments also from the public side. Skills, we should train our citizens more and more to these issues. And so I try to give a kind of a full picture, this broad approach to AI to survive in a digital age. And this is how I'm approaching these in the meantime, that I see the question is already there, that we have to ask ourselves, do we want to survive in a digital age? And if yes, what we have to do. And this, therefore, the manifesto should give a kind of a hint in saying how we might proceed. The Commission now reacted a little bit in this way with the so-called digital decade or the digital compass and so on. But already there I'm missing, and this is also what I'm asking for, a kind of priority setting, a political will to come forward, to concentrate on priorities. Also, if this is at least autonomous driving, if this is artificial intelligence, 3D printing, health sector, smart farming, green tech, or whatever it is. But I think we have to prioritize more and more. And the other, probably more, very important point is that we have to change our mindset, especially in the political leaders in our member states. I think we can survive only if we are joining forces in the European Union. And there might be also another point in saying, if we are acting as a legislator as slow as what we are doing right now and what we have done the last term, etc., then we are not fast enough. And therefore we have to think about our own structures, how we can give our digital industry more help in having legal clarity and so on, that we coming up probably in 3 months' time with a kind of an idea and then saying, if you're meeting these, then you're not getting fined or you're not in trouble. But if you're not meeting these, then you are out. But then we have time to regulate more specifically. But I think we need to be more in the forehand of all the development, also as a legislator, and in our very, very slow proceedings, we are not ready for the future.
A bit of pessimism in your voice. Very quick follow-up. Can we actually be fully digitally sovereign or self-sufficient when we bear in mind that we are currently absolutely dependent on other countries and other continents for raw materials, for semiconductors, for investment even? Where is all this debate going, and can actually Europe be fully digitally sovereign, or this is just a catchword?
No, let's say in this way, we can be more digital sovereign if we are really serious, have the will to do so. And not just saying these and then there's nothing as a kind of a follow-up. No, we need to set these prioritizing, we should have this prioritizing, we should have the investment to say, so this is what we are thinking, how our future should be, and then focusing on these, investing, doing the legal framework, doing the practical framework, the regulatory framework, whatever you can think about, but it needs to be focused on something. And here, so there, if we are doing so, then we might have a wonderful future and also playing a leading role in digitalization. Regarding the raw materials, of course, we also have to think about how we can make ourselves less dependent. And therefore, so we have the right ideas. If you are looking to the semiconductors, the Commission mentioned these, and but so the US government also I think is thinking in the same direction later than we are, but they are doing this immediately and saying, oh yes, we are spending $50 billion for it, and then they are starting to be independent or more independent. And this is so far too complicated, it seems, in our structures. Therefore, we need a kind of joining forces and European projects, and then we might have a wonderful, bright future also in the digital age.
You already mentioned, though, that we are squeezed between the US and China. So very quickly, maybe let's talk about the elephant in the room, as many conversations address this. We inevitably touch upon China. Systemic rival, competitor, especially on the tech front, we're really facing tough competition from them. Not to mention, this is an authoritarian system of governance. This is also a very difficult debate in national capitals across Europe as well, how best to approach China. How do you see the threat coming from China, and how do you think the EU should handle its relations, especially when it comes to tech in the future with the Asian country?
So the Chinese are acting very intelligent. They have a plan how to conquer this world in digital issues, and they are just doing this wonderful. They are offering a lot of services to other countries, and all of them are happy to take these, but all of a sudden you are realizing all the data are going to China, and they might have then a better evaluation how the world is doing, if this is weather forecast, if this is the harvest of something, and so on. they get a totally better view because of some intelligent products. They are flooding the market, and
both
everyone,
software and
yes,
hardware.
Yes, and everyone is using these at the end. So they are in a very good position, and we have to be careful. They are a competitor, and they are a kind of a system rival in a way, but they are more efficient right now than a democratic structure. But then we have to think about how we can survive in a democratic, structured world, and being more flexible and more speedy in approaching new developments. Then we might have a chance. But if we are just concentrating on internal problems all the time, we are seeing the world is passing by, not waiting for Europe, and all of a sudden we are realizing that we do not have our foot in the door.
Does this mean, although in the meantime, that we should cut them off when it comes to 5G, when it comes to smart city systems for management, when it comes to data penetration? Do we need to be offensive on this front? The Brits, for example, they said they're going to completely rip off a certain company from their networks. Should we follow these steps or be a bit more cautious?
Yeah. So this is a kind of a very radical approach. And probably, yes, we should more confront the Chinese behavior on all these. But also there are other ways. So if we are trying also to prove and to observe all the elements of a 5G network, so we certainly can do this also differently. But in the long run, probably you have to be very, very careful, and therefore probably you need to confront them more than like what we are doing right now. And I think it's better also for us to be very clear what are the do's and don'ts, and here I think our approach right now is not the best way forward. We need to be more confronting, saying where's the limitation, the limits, and then I wouldn't be too open to China. Of course, this is not only the digital market, so the Silk Road question is also something we have to approach in a community as a European Union. If we are not doing so, then we are lost. They understand how to get one or two or whatever member state on board and spoiling them a little bit, and then all of a sudden we are splitted. And this is what I think our political leaders should more have in focus. And in these digital terms, of course, it's much more intensive than in the other economy. But here we have to be more focused on these, and probably in the long run, or probably not in the short run, but in the long run, we have to say, no, we do not want your elements in our infrastructure. We can't be sure that you are not spying on us.
Absolutely. A collective, a more assertive approach from Europe towards China maybe is the way forward for our actual digital sovereignty in the future.
Yes. So you have to see the competition in two layers. So at first we have the Western and the Asian approach. So here we need the US. And on the lower level, we have a competition between the US and the European market. So it's not easy to find a solution, but we need to be very sure regarding security, spying, and so on, that we make sure. So no, we do not want your elements in our infrastructure.
Absolutely. I think that the important thing to communicate to citizens and experts as well is that here we are even talking about national security implications. We're not talking only about human rights in China, only about trade. We're talking about our own national security and personal perseverance and digital integrity when it comes to China. I've been talking with Axel Voss about sovereignty, about policy, about making sure that Europe moves forward and builds a better future, as Mr. Voss said. Thanks so much for listening. Tune in again to Brussels Bites. Hopefully we'll be back very shortly.
Thanks a lot.
That was today's episode of Brussels Bites. Follow us on SoundCloud for more.